Alpha King's twins spoke their first words. They pointed at the Wolfless Omega and called her Mum. Mom. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade, severing the heavy silence of the grand hall. It wasn't a babble. It wasn't a mistake. It was clear, bell-like, and devastating. At the center of the room, Nicholas, the Alpha King, a man who could crush boulders with a single blow and whose growl commanded armies, looked as if he had been shot in the chest. He stared at his twin heirs, Lucas and Lily, perched in their high chairs. Then, slowly, terrified of what he might find, his gaze followed their chubby, pointing fingers. They were pointing at the servants' entrance, at the girl with the frayed apron, the girl who smelled of nothing but soap and fear, the girl who wasn't even a wolf. Nicholas's eyes narrowed, turning from shock to a predator's lethal suspicion. "Explain," he growled, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. Now, Rachel knew the rules of the Blackwood Pack House by heart, though they were never written down. Rule number 1, be invisible. Rule number 2, never look an alpha in the eye. Rule number 3, a wolfless Omega is worth less than the floorboards she scrubs. She was 22, but in the hierarchy of the pack, she was a child, a defect. Born to shift parents, but unable to shift, unable to mind link, and lacking the accelerated healing that made her peers invincible. She was fragile, breakable. "Faster, Rachel. The delegation arrives at noon." The head housekeeper, Martha, barked, stepping over the spot Rachel was scrubbing. Martha was a beta, stout and efficient, who viewed Rachel as a charity case that had overstayed its welcome. "Yes, Martha," Rachel murmured, dipping her rag into the grey water. Her knees ached. The stone floors of the manor were unforgiving, and the winter draft cut through her thin uniform. She worked in rhythm, the repetitive motion a shield against her thoughts. She tried not to think about the life she could have had if her wolf had ever woken up. She tried not to think about the Alpha King, Nicholas, whose presence in the house felt like a storm front moving through a valley, heavy, electric, and dangerous. A cry echoed from the upper floors. Rachel froze. It was a specific cry, high-pitched, breathless, and escalating. It was Lily. "Ignore it," Martha said sharply, noticing Rachel's hesitation. "The wet nurses are handling it. That acts as their job, not yours." "It sounds like colic," Rachel said, wringing out the cloth. Or she dropped her bear. "The nurses don't know that she needs the ear rubbed, not the back." "You are a cleaner, Rachel. Not a mother. Not a Luna. Get back to work." Rachel bit her lip, tasting iron. She lowered her head, but her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew the twins better than anyone, though she was never supposed to be near them. For the past 6 months, since the twins turned 1, Rachel had been the night shift shadow. When the paid nannies, high-ranking deltas who only wanted the prestige of raising the king's heirs, fell asleep or grew frustrated with the wailing infants, Rachel would sneak in. She would change them, rock them, hum songs her own mother used to sing before the accident. She was the one who knew Lucas hated having socks on his feet, and that Lily would only sleep if the window was cracked open exactly an inch. She was their ghost mother. And they were the only living things in this fortress of muscle and claw that looked at her with love instead of disdain. "King Nicholas is on the move," a guard shouted from the foyer. "Clear the hall." Rachel scrambled to her feet, grabbing her bucket. The Wolfless were not permitted to be in the king's path. It was considered bad luck, an insult to his strength to have weakness in his line of sight. She pressed herself into a narrow alcove behind a tapestry, holding her breath. Heavy boots struck the stone. The air pressure dropped. The scent hit her first. Rain on hot asphalt, pine, and something metallic, like blood. It was an overwhelming, intoxicating scent that made her human knees weak. Nicholas strode past. Even from her hiding spot, He was terrifyingly magnificent. He was over 6 feet of coiled violence, dressed in a tailored black suit that strained against his shoulders. His jaw was set in a permanent line of exhaustion. He had been a widower since the birth of the twins, a tragedy that had turned him from a fair leader into a cold, ruthless monarch. He paused, just for a fraction of a second, right in front of the tapestry hiding her. Rachel stopped breathing. Had she made a sound? Did she smell of sweat? Nicholas tilted his head, his nostrils flaring slightly. His ice-blue eyes scanned the hallway, searching for something. But because she was wolfless, she had no scent signature to a wolf. To him, she was just background noise. "Sir?" His gamma, a wiry man named Elias, asked. "The council is waiting. I thought I heard—" Nicholas trailed off, shaking his head. The exhaustion in his voice was palpable. "Never mind. The twins. Are they ready for the presentation tonight? The nannies are preparing them. They're spirited today." Nicholas let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Spirited. They scream every time I hold them, Elias. My own children treat me like a stranger." "They are young, Alpha. They will learn." "They have no mother," Nicholas said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "and a father who smells of war. What do they have to learn except fear?" He stormed off, the heavy oak doors of his office slamming shut behind him. Rachel let out a shaky breath, sliding down the wall until she hit the floor. Her heart ached for him. A dangerous, treasonous emotion. She was nothing to him. But hearing the pain in the voice of the continent's most feared predator made her want to do the unthinkable. She wanted to help him. The pack gathering was not a party. It was a political minefield. The grand hall was transformed. Chandeliers dripping with crystals cast a golden glow over tables laden with roasted meats and wine. The air was thick with the pheromones of powerful wolves, alphas from neighboring territories, high-ranking betas, and the eligible daughters of wealthy lineages, all preening and posturing. Rachel was tasked with coat check duty, a job usually reserved for the elderly, but they were short-staffed. She stood in the drafty cloakroom, taking furs and leather jackets from guests who didn't even look at her face. "Careful with that," a woman snapped as Rachel took a white fox fur. It was Lady Veronica, a striking blonde alpha female who had been openly courting Nicholas for months. "If you drop it, I'll have you whipped." "Yes, my lady," Rachel whispered, hanging the coat with trembling hands. "Can you believe the king is presenting the heirs tonight?" Veronica said to her companion, ignoring Rachel completely. "Risky. If they cry, it shows weakness. A pack needs strong blood." "I heard they haven't spoken a word yet," the companion sneered. "Delayed. Probably the mother's weak genes." Rachel gripped the counter. The twins were perfectly healthy. They just observed. They were watchers, like her. They didn't speak because they didn't have anyone they wanted to talk to. The nannies cooed at them with fake, high-pitched voices, and Nicholas spoke to them like they were soldiers. "Rachel!" The sharp hiss came from the service door. It was Marcus, the pack beta. He looked frantic, his usually impeccable tie skewed. Rachel hurried over. "Beta Marcus, what's wrong? I need you upstairs. Now." "Me? I'm not allowed on the residential floor during a— I don't care about the rules right now." Marcus grabbed her wrist, his grip bruising. "The twins are having a meltdown. The nannies are useless. The king is 5 minutes away from tearing someone's throat out. You're the only one who cleans the nursery, right? Maybe you know where their pacifiers are, or something." He dragged her out of the cloakroom, up the back servants' stairs. Rachel stumbled, her heart racing. This was a mistake. If Nicholas found her in the royal wing, she could be exiled. They burst into the nursery. It was chaos. 2 nannies were huddled in the corner, looking disheveled and teary-eyed. Objects were thrown across the room. And in the center, inside their ornate wooden cribs, Lucas and Lily were screaming. It wasn't just crying. It was the terrified, purple-faced shrieking of abandoned children. "Fix it!" Marcus ordered the room, panic in his eyes. "We have to take them down in 10 minutes. "We've tried everything," one nanny sobbed. "They won't take the bottle. They won't be held." Rachel didn't think. She didn't look at Marcus or the nannies. She just moved. She crossed the room, her body relaxing into a familiar posture. She didn't rush at them. She slowed down. She approached the cribs and made a soft, clicking sound with her tongue, a sound she used to signal she was there in the dark. The screaming didn't stop, but it hitched. "Hey," she whispered, her voice low and textured, completely different from the shrill panic of the nannies. "Hey, little wolves, too much noise? Is it too loud?" She reached into the pocket of her apron. She shouldn't have had them, but she had saved them from the laundry earlier. 2 small, worn squares of velvet fabric. The nannies kept throwing them away, thinking them trash, but Rachel knew the twins used them to self-soothe. She held them out. Lucas stopped crying instantly. He reached out a chubby hand, grabbed the velvet, and pressed it to his cheek. Lily sniffled, her chest heaving, and looked at Rachel with wide, wet eyes. She reached her arms up. Rachel hesitated, touching the airs in front of witnesses. "Pick her up, for goddess's sake," Marcus hissed. Rachel scooped Lily up. The toddler buried her face in Rachel's neck, inhaling the scent of soap and skin. Rachel rubbed the spot behind Lily's ear, the exact pressure point that calmed her. "There," Rachel murmured. "You're okay. You're safe." The room went silent. The nannies stared, mouths agape. Marcus exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for an hour. "Incredible," Marcus muttered. He looked at Rachel with new eyes. "Who are you again?" "Rachel, sir. From housekeeping." "Right. Rachel." Marcus checked his watch. "Okay, change of plans. The nannies are vibrating with anxiety. The kids smell it. You carry them down." "What?" Rachel recoiled, clutching Lily tighter. "I can't go into the hall. Look at me." She gestured to her grey-stained uniform, her messy bun, her worn shoes. "I'm a Wolfless servant. The king will kill me." "The king wants quiet, happy children," Marcus said, his voice hard. "You are the only thing keeping them quiet. You will carry them to the entrance, hand them to the king, and then vanish. Do you understand?" Rachel felt nausea swirl in her gut. But then Lily squeezed her neck, a tiny fist gripping her collar. "I understand," Rachel whispered. The walk to the grand hall felt like a march to the gallows. Rachel carried Lily on her left hip while she held Lucas's hand as he toddled beside her. Marcus walked ahead, clearing the path of other servants. Every step echoed. Rachel tried to smooth her apron with one hand, ashamed of her appearance. She was a smudge of grey in a world of gold and velvet. "Wait here," Marcus said, stopping them just behind the heavy velvet curtains that separated the servant corridors from the main stage of the hall. "When the announcer calls for the heirs, you walk out, hand them to the king, and leave immediately." "He's going to be angry," Rachel whispered. "He doesn't know me." "He'll be grateful they aren't screaming," Marcus said, though he didn't look convinced. He slipped through the curtain. Rachel stood in the shadows. She could hear the hum of the crowd. The smell of roasted meat made her stomach growl. She hadn't eaten since breakfast. "Up," Lucas demanded, tugging on her skirt. Rachel smiled sadly and crouched down, picking him up so she held one twin on each hip. They were heavy, but she was used to the weight of labor. "You have to be good for your daddy," she told them softly, nose to nose with Lucas. "He loves you very much. You have to be brave, little wolves." Lucas blinked at her, his eyes the same startling ice blue as Nicholas's. He patted her cheek with a sticky hand. "And now," the announcer's voice boomed, amplified by magic, "the future of the Blackwood pack, the heirs to the throne, Lucas and Lily Blackwood." The applause was thunderous. The curtains were pulled back by 2 guards. Rachel was blinded by the light. She froze. The sudden exposure was physical pain. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the stage. She saw the confusion ripple through the front rows. Who was this ragged girl holding the princes? Was she a new nanny? A charity case? But she couldn't stop. She had orders. She stepped forward, her legs shaking. In the center of the dais stood Nicholas. He looked larger than life, radiating power. He was smiling at the crowd, but as he turned to receive his children, the smile vanished. His eyes locked onto Rachel. Time dilated. Rachel saw the confusion in his expression, followed by a flash of irritation. He didn't recognize her. To him, she was a stranger holding his most precious treasures. He took a step toward her, his hands reaching out. "Give them to me," he said, his voice low, intended only for her. But the microphone on the podium picked it up. Rachel curtsied awkwardly, shifting the weight. She tried to hand Lucas over. But Lucas recoiled. The crowd gasped. The heir to the Alpha King pushed his father's hand away and turned back, burying his face in the chest of the servant girl. Nicholas froze. His hand hung in midair. The rejection was public, humiliating. A low growl started deep in his chest, an instinctive reaction to being denied. "Give them to me," Nicholas commanded, his eyes flashing wolf gold. Rachel was trembling so hard she thought she might drop them. "Lucas, please," she begged, trying to pry his fingers off her apron. "Go to Papa." "No," Lucas shrieked, a sound that cut through the hall. Lily began to cry, sensing the tension. She wrapped her legs tighter around Rachel's waist. The room was deadly silent. The most powerful alpha in the world was being rejected by his own cubs in favor of a maid. Nicholas looked at Rachel, and for the first time he really saw her. He saw the terror in her eyes, the poverty of her dress, the way she held his children as if she would die for them. "What have you done to them?" Nicholas accused, his voice rising. "You've bewitched them." "No, sire, I just—" "Guards!" Nicholas shouted. And then it happened. The silence that followed his shout was heavy, suffocating. In that breath of quiet, Lucas turned his head. He looked at his father, frustrated. Then he pointed a chubby finger directly at Rachel's face. "Mum," Lucas said. Nicholas stopped. The guards stopped. Lily, sniffing, copied her brother. She patted Rachel's cheek. "Mum. Mama." The word hit the room like a physical blow. Rachel stopped breathing. Her heart plummeted into her stomach. "No. No. Please don't say that." Nicholas looked as if he had been struck. He stared at the twins. Then he stared at Rachel. The look on his face wasn't just anger anymore. It was something far more dangerous. It was the look of a man whose entire reality had just fractured. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. The heat radiating off him was scorching. He grabbed Rachel's chin, forcing her to look up at him. His grip was iron. "What did you teach them?" he hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Who are you?" "I'm nobody," Rachel managed to choke out, tears spilling over. "I'm just the maid." "They called you Mom," Nicholas roared, spinning around to face the silent, stunned crowd. He turned back to her, his lips pulled back in a snarl. "My children do not speak. They have never spoken. And their first word is a lie directed at a wolfless servant. I didn't teach them. I swear!" Nicholas ripped the children from her arms. Lucas screamed, reaching back for Rachel. Lily wailed, kicking her father in the chest. The rejection was absolute. Nicholas struggled to hold the thrashing children. He looked at his gamma. "Clear the hall. Everyone out. Now." As the guards began to herd the murmuring, shocked guests toward the exits, Nicholas turned his gaze back to Rachel. He pointed a finger at her, his nail lengthening into a claw. "And take her to the interrogation cells," he commanded, his voice devoid of mercy. "Nobody turns my own blood against me. Find out who sent her, and find out what spell she used. No, please, Rachel cried as two large guards grabbed her by the arms. I didn't do anything. I just love them. Love? Nicholas laughed, a cold, terrifying sound. Wolfless creatures don't know love. They only know survival. Get her out of my sight. As they dragged her away, Rachel watched Nicholas standing alone on the dais, holding two screaming children who were reaching for her. The look of utter devastation and betrayal on the king's face was the last thing she saw before the heavy doors slammed shut, sealing her fate. The interrogation cell was not built for comfort. It was designed to dismantle the soul. Rachel sat on a cold metal chair bolted to the concrete floor. Her wrists were cuffed to the table, the silver-infused metal biting into her skin, useless against a human, but standard protocol for anyone accused of treason. The room smelled of antiseptic, old blood, and terror. There were no windows, only a harsh fluorescent light that hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. She had been there for 3 hours. No one had spoken to her. It was a classic intimidation tactic, silence before the storm. But Rachel didn't need intimidation. She was already shattered. She wasn't a spy or a witch. She was a cleaner who had made the fatal mistake of loving children who were too high above her station. The heavy steel door groaned open. Rachel flinched, her chains rattling against the table. Nicholas walked in. He had shed his formal ceremonial jacket. His white dress shirt was rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and veins that pulsed with adrenaline. He didn't look like a king now. He looked like an executioner. He carried a wooden chair in one hand, which he spun around and straddled, placing him uncomfortably close to her. He didn't yell. That was worse. He stared at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. His eyes were a turbulent storm of blue and gold, scanning her face for any tick of deception. My children are currently screaming so loud they are vibrating the windows of the East Wing, Nicholas said, his voice terrifyingly calm. They have refused food. They have bitten 2 nannies. Lucas threw a porcelain lamp at the beta. Rachel's heart lurched, her own fear momentarily forgotten. Is he okay? Did he cut himself on the shards? Nicholas slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked through the small room like a gunshot. Do not pretend to care. Tell me what you did to them. I didn't do anything, Rachel cried, tears springing to her eyes. I was there at night, when they cried. The nannies. They sleep deeply. I just wanted them to stop crying. I sang to them. I held them. That's not magic, Alpha. That's just being human. So you used a compulsion spell, a blood bind? Nicholas accused, leaning in, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Because my children rejected me, their father. For a wolfless girl. I don't have magic. I can't even light a candle with a match without burning myself. She pulled against the cuffs, the metal rattling. Please, Alpha, I'm nobody. Check my records. I'm Rachel Vance. My parents were deltas in the river pack. They died in a car crash when I was 10. I've been in the system ever since. Nicholas narrowed his eyes. He had checked her records while she sat in the dark. They were painfully ordinary. Orphaned, wolfless, low test scores, no criminal history, nothing that explained why the future alphas of the continent preferred her over their own bloodline. Why did they call you that? Nicholas asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Why Mom? I don't know, Rachel sobbed, her head dropping. Maybe because I'm the only one who holds them. Maybe because I sing to them. Kids get confused. They don't know titles. They only know who is there. My children are not confused. They are alphas. Their instincts are sharper than yours or mine. Nicholas stood up, pacing the small cell. The air around him crackled with ozone. His wolf was surfacing, agitated and confused. He stopped behind her. Rachel stiffened, feeling the heat of his body radiating against her back. "If you are innocent," he murmured near her ear, sending a shiver down her spine, "then why do you smell like that?" Rachel blinked, trembling. "Like what? Bleach? Floor wax?" "Like rain," Nicholas said, almost to himself. "Like the calm before a storm. It's faint, buried under the chemical stench of the cleaning supplies. But it's there. Wolfless humans don't have a scent, Rachel. They smell like dust and sweat. You smell important." He grabbed her hair, gently but firmly, tilting her head back to expose her neck. He leaned in, inhaling deeply at the pulse point. Rachel stopped breathing. This was an intimate act, a claim. Nicholas pulled back sharply, looking disturbed, as if he had touched a live wire. He rubbed his face with his hand. "This makes no sense. The pack doctor says you have no wolf gene markers. You are biologically human. Yet my wolf is pacing in my head every time I'm near you." The door banged open again. Elias, the Gamma, stood there, looking breathless and pale. "Alpha, you need to come, now." "I'm in the middle of an interrogation, Elias." "It's the twins," Elias said, his voice tight with panic. "Lucas has stopped screaming. He's turning blue, sir. He's holding his breath until he passes out. The medics can't get him to breathe. His heart rate is spiking." Rachel didn't think. The chains rattled as she surged to her feet, ignoring the pain in her wrists. "He does that when he's panicked. It's a breath-holding spell. You have to blow in his face. Quickly, or he'll go into a seizure." Nicholas looked at her. He saw the genuine, unadulterated terror in her eyes. Not for herself, but for his son. He made a decision. "Unlock her," Nicholas ordered Elias. "Sir?" "Unlock her and bring her upstairs. If she tries to run, kill her. If she tries to hurt them, kill her. But right now, she might be the only one who can save my son." The nursery was a battlefield. Medical equipment was strewn across the floor. 3 doctors were huddled around Lucas's crib. The air smelled of distress pheromones, acrid and sour, burning the nose. When Nicholas burst in with Rachel in tow, the scene was chaotic. Lily was sobbing in the corner, her face red and blotchy, clutching the bars of her crib so hard her knuckles were white. Lucas was silent, his small body rigid, his face a terrifying shade of violet. "Move!" Nicholas roared, pushing a doctor aside. Rachel didn't wait for permission. She scrambled forward, rubbing her wrists where the cuffs had been. She reached into the crib. "Lucas!" she said sharply, her voice cutting through the mechanical beeping of the monitors. "Lucas, look at me!" The boy's eyes were rolled back slightly. He was locked in a panic response, his little lungs seized. Rachel didn't panic. She had seen this once before when a thunderstorm had shaken the house. She scooped him up, ignoring the gasps of the medical staff who were terrified of a Wolfless touching the air. She held him out at arm's length, looked him dead in the eye, and blew a sharp, sudden burst of air directly into his face. The shock broke the cycle. Lucas gasped, a ragged, desperate inhale that filled his lungs. He coughed, his color returning in a rush of pink. Then he let out a wail that sounded like music to Rachel's ears. "Oh, thank God," Rachel whispered, pulling him against her chest. She fell into the rocking chair, her legs giving out. "You foolish, brave boy. You have to breathe. Breathing is non-negotiable." Lucas gripped her shirt with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for a toddler. He buried his face in her neck, his sobbing quieting to hiccups almost instantly. "Mama," he whimpered, the word muffled against her collarbone. Rachel froze, looking up. Nicholas was standing 3 feet away. He had watched the entire thing. He watched how the doctors, men with PhDs and decades of experience, had failed, and how this girl with frayed cuffs and dirt under her fingernails had succeeded in seconds. And he heard the word again. "Mama." But this time, he didn't feel anger. He felt a cold dread coiling in his stomach. Because as he watched Rachel rock his son, He saw Lily standing up in her crib, reaching out with desperate hands. "Let her have Lily," Nicholas said quietly. "Sir, this is highly irregular," the head doctor began. "Give her the girl," Nicholas snapped, his eyes never leaving Rachel. The nurse lifted Lily and handed her to Rachel. Rachel adjusted her hold, balancing both heavy toddlers on her lap. Lily immediately tangled her fingers in Rachel's hair and let out a long, shuddering sigh, her eyes drooping shut. The silence that fell over the room was heavy. The twins, who had been inconsolable for hours, were asleep within 2 minutes. Rachel looked up at Nicholas, her eyes wide and fearful. She expected him to rip them away again. "Leave us," Nicholas said to the room. "But Alpha, the boy needs monitoring. He needs sleep, and so do I. Get out." The staff filed out, leaving the Alpha King alone with the prisoner and the heirs. Nicholas pulled up a stool and sat opposite Rachel. He watched her for a long time. He watched the way her hand automatically rubbed circles on Lucas's back. He watched the protective curve of her shoulders. "Who are you, Rachel?" he asked, his voice devoid of the earlier aggression. It was a genuine, haunted question now. "I told you," she whispered, afraid to wake the children. "I'm nobody." "You are not nobody to them." Nicholas pointed at the twins. "That is not a learned behavior. That is a bond, a soul bond." "But I'm wolfless," Rachel insisted. "I can't bond." "Maybe," Nicholas said. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Or maybe we've all been lied to." He reached out slowly. Rachel flinched, but he didn't touch her face. He touched Lucas's foot, then Lily's hand. Then, very deliberately, he brushed his knuckles against Rachel's knee. A spark. It wasn't static electricity. It was a jolt of pure energy, blue and visible, that arced between them. Rachel gasped. The twins stirred but didn't wake. Nicholas stared at his hand, then at her. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. "You felt that?" I... "Wolfless humans don't conduct pack magic," Nicholas whispered, his voice trembling. "That spark, that only happens between fated pairs or blood relatives." He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. He looked at Rachel with a mixture of awe and horror. "Stay here," he commanded. "Do not leave this room. Do not let anyone else in. If the guards try to enter, tell them I will have their heads." "Where are you going?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. "To find out why a wolfless girl conducts magic like a high-born Luna," Nicholas said grimly. "And to find out why my dead wife's medical records are sealed." Nicholas stormed through the corridors of the Pack Hospital, his cape billowing behind him like a storm cloud. He didn't go to the main ward. He went to the basement levels, to the genetics lab and the archives. "Open it," he commanded the startled night technician, pointing at the secure server room. "Alpha, I need a council override key for—" Nicholas didn't wait. He grabbed the electronic lock and crushed it with his bare hand, sparks flying as he ripped the mechanism from the doorframe. He kicked the door open. "I'm done asking," Nicholas growled. "Pull up the birth records for Lucas and Lily. The raw data, not the public file." The technician, a young wolf named Sarah, was trembling so hard she could barely type. Yes, Alpha." Screens flickered to life. Lines of code scrolled by. "There," Nicholas pointed. "Why is the maternal DNA sequence encrypted? It's standard for high-security births, to protect the Luna's privacy. Unlock it." "I can't. It's bio-locked by the former head physician, Dr. Orris." Nicholas narrowed his eyes. Dr. Orris had retired to a private island the week after the twins were born. At the time, Nicholas had thought it was a well-earned rest. Now, it looked like a payoff. "Pull up Rachel Vance's file," Nicholas ordered. Sarah typed frantically. "Here, sir. Employment record, medical history, nothing unusual. Just basic checkups." "Look deeper, look for gaps." Sarah frowned, squinting at the screen. That's odd. What? There's a gap in her medical history, about 2 years ago. For 9 months, there are no entries. No dentist, no flu shots. Nothing. It says she was on administrative leave for a contagious illness, quarantined in the West Wing. Nicholas felt the blood drain from his face. The West Wing? That's the maternity ward. Yes, sir. But she's Wolfless. Why would she be in the PAC maternity ward for an illness? Nicholas turned away from the screen, his mind racing. 2 years ago. That was exactly when Eleanor, his late wife, had miraculously conceived after years of infertility struggles. The public story was that Eleanor had gone into seclusion to protect the pregnancy. But Eleanor had been frail. She had died in childbirth, or so he was told. He hadn't been allowed in the room until it was over. He had been handed 2 healthy, screaming babies and shown the body of his wife. Test the twins' DNA against Rachel's, Nicholas said. His voice was hollow. Sir, that's impossible. Rachel is human. The twins are purebred alphas. Do it, Nicholas roared, the glass of the server room rattling. Sarah scrambled to grab a sample vial. I have a blood sample from Rachel on file from her employment screening last month, and the twins have their monthly workup. She loaded the samples into the sequencer. The machine whirred. The minutes stretched like hours. Nicholas stood like a statue, staring at the progress bar. If he was right, if his suspicion was correct, then the council had committed treason. They had committed a violation of nature so profound it made him nauseous. Beep. The results flashed on the screen. Maternal match. 99.9% confirmed biological Tartha. Rachel Vance. Sarah gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. Alpha, this says she's their mother, but that's impossible. She's wolfless. She can't carry alpha pups. They would kill a human mother in the womb. Nicholas stared at the screen. The truth washed over him, cold and clarifying. She isn't human, Nicholas said, his voice deadly quiet. She survived carrying 2 alpha heirs. No human could do that. She's a wolf, a strong one. But she can't shift. Her tests show 0 lycanthropy. Suppression, Nicholas said, the word tasting like ash. They suppressed her. They found a compatible female, maybe even my true mate that I never met, used her as a surrogate because Elena couldn't carry, and then they suppressed her wolf to hide the evidence. He remembered the file he had seen earlier, gestational carrier. He remembered the way the council had urged him to remarry quickly, to find a suitable mother. They had stolen her life. They had stolen her memories. They had stolen her children, and then they had enslaved her in the very house where her children slept. They had turned the mother of the pack into a maid. Rage, pure and white-hot, flooded his system. His claws extended involuntarily, gouging deep grooves into the steel desk. "Print it," Nicholas commanded. "Print everything, and then wipe this server so only I have the copy." "Yes, Alpha." Nicholas turned to the door. He had to go back to the nursery. He had to look at Rachel. No, not just Rachel. He had to look at the mother of his children. He had threatened to kill her. He had called her nobody. The guilt hit him harder than any physical blow. He wasn't just a blind king. He was a monster. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to find the rest of them. The council meeting was still in session, celebrating the successful presentation of the heirs. "I'm coming for them," Nicholas whispered to the empty hallway, his eyes glowing with the promise of violence. "I'm going to burn it all down." The council hall was warm, smelling of roasted venison and expensive wine. The elite of the pack were toasting to the future, unaware that the future was currently marching down the hallway with murder in his eyes. Elder Thorne, the head of the High Council, raised his glass. To King Nicholas, and his strength in raising the heirs alone. May the memory of Queen Eleanor guide us. "Here, here!" The The room bellowed. The heavy oak doors didn't just open, they exploded inward. Splinters of wood rained down on the nearest tables. The music cut out instantly. Silence slammed into the room, heavy and terrified. Nicholas stood in the wreckage of the doorway. He wasn't wearing his crown. He was covered in the dust of the archives, his shirt stained with the sweat of a man who had run through hell. But it was his eyes that made the strongest alphas in the room shrink back. They were glowing a solid, vibrant gold, the sign of an alpha on the brink of a frenzy. "Nicholas!" Elder Thorn lowered his glass, his smile faltering. "My king, what has happened? Is there an attack?" "Yes," Nicholas said, his voice carrying to the back of the hall without shouting. "There has been an attack on my bloodline, an attack on the laws of nature. And you led it, Thorn." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I don't know what you mean," Thorn said, signaling the guards with a subtle twitch of his hand. "You are clearly unwell. Perhaps the stress of the twins." "The twins are sleeping peacefully," Nicholas interrupted, stalking forward. Every step he took cracked the marble floor. "They are sleeping in the arms of their mother." Thorn's face went pale. "Elena is dead, sire." "Elena is dead," Nicholas agreed, stopping at the foot of the high table. "But the mother of my children is alive. She is currently locked in the nursery, wearing a maid's uniform, because you stole her life to cover up your political manufacturing of an heir." The room erupted in gasps. Nicholas threw the stack of papers he had printed onto the table. They scattered. DNA tests, suppression orders, the signatures of the council members who had authorized the procedure. "Read it!" Nicholas roared. "You couldn't let the king be without an heir. But Elena was barren. So you found a compatible she-wolf, a young orphan with no family to miss her. You drugged her. You used her as a broodmare. And when she delivered my sons and daughter, you chemically lobotomized her wolf and enslaved her." "It was for the good of the pack," Thorn screamed, dropping the pretense. "We needed a strong lineage. You needed a queen from a noble house, not a stray delta." "She is not a stray." Nicholas lunged. Chaos broke loose. Thorn's personal guards intercepted Nicholas, but they were paper dolls against a hurricane. Nicholas backhanded the first guard, sending him flying into a pillar with a sickening crunch. He grabbed the second by the throat and threw him into the buffet table. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Nicholas vaulted the table, grabbing Thorn by the lapels of his expensive suit. He dragged the elder close, baring his fangs. "You took 2 years from her," Nicholas snarled. "You took her voice. You took her children. I should rip your head off right here. If you kill me, the suppression key dies with me." Thorn choked out, his feet dangling off the ground. "She's on a magically binded dampener, Nicholas. If it's not removed carefully, the return of her wolf will kill her. She'll burn from the inside out." Nicholas froze. The beast inside him wanted blood, but the father inside him needed Rachel alive. "Where is the key?" Nicholas demanded. "In my vault. Only I can retrieve it." "Then you will get it." Nicholas threw him to the floor. "And if she so much as shivers while you do it, I will feed you to the rogues, piece by piece." The nursery was quiet, but the air was thick with tension. Rachel sat in the rocking chair, Lucas and Lily asleep in her arms. She didn't know what was happening downstairs, but she could feel the castle shaking. Suddenly, the door burst open. Rachel screamed, curling over the children protectively. It was Nicholas. He was covered in blood, not his own, and dragging an elderly man by the collar. Behind him, Gamma Elias and a team of medics rushed in. "Do it," Nicholas commanded, throwing Thorn toward Rachel. "Don't touch them," Rachel yelled, kicking out at the elder. "Get away!" "Rachel, it's okay," Nicholas said, his voice shifting instantly from command to comfort. He stepped between her and Thorn, his hands raised. "He's going to fix you. He's going to give you back what he stole." "What are you talking about?" Rachel was trembling. "I don't have anything to give back." "Your wolf," Nicholas said gently. You aren't wolfless, Rachel. They locked her away. That's why you can't heal. That's why you're weak. But she's in there, and she's fighting to get to our children. Our children. The words hung in the air. Thorn approached with a trembling hand, holding a small vial of iridescent blue liquid and an intricate runic stone. She has to drink this. Then I have to break the seal on her neck. Drink it, Rachel, Nicholas urged. Trust me. Please. Rachel looked at the vial, then at the sleeping faces of the twins. She looked at Nicholas, the man she had feared for 2 years, who was now looking at her with an intensity that burned. She nodded. She handed the babies to Elias, who took them gently. Then she took the vial and downed it. It tasted like fire and mint. Thorn pressed the stone to the base of her neck. He muttered an incantation. Pain. It wasn't a headache. It was a supernova. Rachel screamed, arching her back. It felt like her bones were rearranging themselves. It felt like she was being torn apart and stitched back together all at once. Rachel. Nicholas was there, holding her upright, absorbing her thrashing. Hold on, fight it. Deep inside her mind, a door that had been welded shut for 2 years was kicked open. A howl echoed in her soul. A white wolf, large and furious, burst from the cage. Memories flooded back, not the dull grey memories of scrubbing floors, but vibrant, colourful ones, being taken from the street, the needles, the belly growing round, the first kick, the moment they were born, the smell of them, pine and rain, and then the darkness. I remember, Rachel gasped, her eyes flying open. Her eyes were no longer brown. They were a piercing, glowing violet. The force of her awakening sent a shock wave through the room. The windows shattered outward. Thorn was thrown back against the wall. Rachel stood up. She didn't look like a tired maid anymore. Her posture straightened, her skin flushed with health as the healing factor kicked in, erasing the scars on her hands and the dark circles under her eyes. She turned to Thorn. She didn't need Nicholas to protect her anymore. She growled, a sound that was distinctly inhuman. You, she said, her voice layered with the growl of her wolf. You took my cubs. I... Thorn scrambled backward. Rachel! Nicholas stepped in, placing a hand on her shoulder. He is yours to judge. But later. Look. He pointed to Elias. The twins were awake, but they weren't crying. They were staring at her with wide, happy eyes. They recognized the energy. They recognized the wolf. Rachel fell to her knees, holding her arms out. Lucas. Lily. They scrambled out of Elias's arms and ran to her. Rachel buried her face in their necks, inhaling their scent, a scent she now realized was a mix of Nicholas and herself. Mine, she whispered, her wolf purring so loudly it vibrated her chest. Nicholas knelt beside them, wrapping his large arms around all 3 of them. The circuit was closed. The family was whole 3 months later. The coronation of a Luna was usually a solemn affair, filled with boring speeches and rigid tradition. This was not that. The pack grounds were overflowing. Wolves from every allied pack on the continent had gathered, not just to see the king remarry, but to see the woman who had become a legend. The wolf in the ashes, the mother who rose from the dead. Rachel stood on the balcony, looking out at the sea of faces. She wore a dress of silver silk that hugged her curves, a stark contrast to the grey uniform she had worn for so long. Her hair was loose, cascading down her back in waves. Nervous? Nicholas appeared beside her, slipping his hand into hers. Terrified, Rachel admitted. They're all staring. They still whisper about my lineage, that I'm not high-born. Let them whisper, Nicholas said, lifting her hand to his lips. You carried the Alpha heirs. You survived suppression. You broke a council elder's nose when he tried to delay the wedding. You are more alpha than any woman born in silk sheets. Rachel smiled, leaning into him. Thorn is enjoying his cell? He's enjoying the view of the dungeon wall, and the fact that he gets to live only because you showed mercy. A squeal interrupted them. Lucas and Lily came toddling out onto the balcony, dressed in miniature formal wear. They were fast now, wolf toddlers with boundless energy. "Mama, look!" Lily pointed at the crowd. "Puppies!" Rachel laughed. "Yes, baby, lots of puppies." Nicholas picked up Lucas, while Rachel scooped up Lily. They stood together, the royal family, framed by the setting sun. "You know," Nicholas said softly, looking at her, "I never believed in fated mates. I thought love was a political arrangement. And now? Now," Nicholas touched her forehead with his, "I know that fate is just a word for the inevitable. It was always you, Rachel, even when I couldn't see you. My wolf knew." Rachel looked at the man who had gone from her terrifying boss to her partner, her defender, and her love. "It was always you," she echoed. They turned to the crowd. Nicholas raised his hand, and the roar of the pack shook the mountains. It wasn't a roar of obligation. It was a roar of celebration. They were no longer a broken king and a hidden ghost. They were the Alpha and the Luna. And standing between them, waving at the cheering crowd, were the twins who had started it all with a single word. The story of the Alpha King and his Wolfless Omega wasn't just a romance, it was a revolution. It changed the laws of the pack. It proved that blood wasn't about lineage, it was about love. And every night, when the castle went quiet, the king and queen would sit in the nursery, listening to the steady breathing of their children, grateful for the miracle that had almost been lost, but was found by the pointing finger of a child who simply wanted his mum. If this story captured your heart, please remember to hit the like button, share it with your fellow romance readers, and subscribe for more dramatic, heart-pounding tales.